Alright guys, welcome to my take of this build, which is the Ralakesh Discharge Slayer. This build has incredibly high damage, it's really fun, it can do Ubers at very little budget compared to most builds out there. And I also want to say that this is not my build, I did not create this build, I found it on Reddit. And I wanted to spread awareness of this build before it gets nerfed at the end of this league, or pretty much the next league. So I want you guys to have a lot of fun with it. I know there isn't much time to play the build, but it is really fun and it is worth even playing it for a few weeks just to see how easily this build just annihilates bosses. For the clear speed, the build has solid AoE clearing. It can clear a whole pack with one discharge. Though do note it is not the quickest at doing maps, but it can be used as a mapping build. We will need to wait for the discharge cooldown before doing the damage again, and we do need to keep weapon swapping to get our charges back to discharge. So our attacking routine would be weapon swap, discharge, weapon swap, and repeat over and over again until everything is dead. Okay, for the single target for this build, it has incredibly high damage. Damage is really easy to scale upwards. It one-shots normal map bosses, as well as two-shots any fragment bosses like Phoenix or Baran, and this build has very high Uber potential. Obviously with the Uber potential, the budget will also be increased by a lot, but for now it has enough damage to do pinnacle bosses pretty easily. This build has enough damage to easily phase Lycia before her lightning attacks, and it can one-shot all the guards, especially since you have a lot of buffs in Sanctums, so this is a very good build for Sanctums. For the survivability of our build, we have 11 endurance charges, which means high physical mitigation. We have capped spell suppression we get from our tree. We also run the Grace Aura for dodge chance, which can also be changed for another aura if we want to do more damage to bosses, as well as having high movement speed so that we can run away and run around enemy mobs. Okay, for the budget we are looking at around 30 divines. This build does showcase a lot of cheap uniques that we need, such as the Badge Brotherhood, Malachi's Loop, and Void Battery. And for the more expensive side of the build is the Watcher's Eye, triple stack cluster jewels, and replica Restless Ward. Alright, what is bad about the build? The one most annoying thing about the build that a lot of people hate is that it's a 2-button build, especially that you need to weapon swap and then discharge, and a lot of people are turned away from this kind of aspect of the build as it is quite important for our damage. Another thing is it's got a very annoying sound effect, especially when the charges are gone away. This can be quite infuriating, especially if your volume's loud. I normally have a video on so I don't notice it as much, but it is very noticeable. And the worst one is that it will most likely be patched next league, so you have about 2 weeks to play the build, have fun with it while it's here, and it 100% will be nerfed. Well, 99.9% just to be sure. Alright, how does this build work? This build works by using the Ralakesh boots. If we actually look at the Ralakesh boots, it says that we lose all frenzy, endurance, and power charges when you move, but endurance charges, frenzy charges, and power charges all are equal to max when you're standing still. So what this build does is we put a gem in the boots with a really high attribute that we don't have. I recommend using a strength gem. The strength is the easiest one where we can take off attributes in our tree so we can have it unavailable. And then if you notice that when we weapon swap, the game for a split second thinks we're using the boots, and if we move, you notice we don't actually lose any charges, and we can just spam the weapon swap, and you can see we pretty much have an infinite duration of power charges. And the whole bug of this boots is that when we weapon swap, it thinks, even if we're moving, it thinks we're standing still. So then we can use discharge, which takes all the power charges, all the endurance charges, all the frenzy charges, and combines them into damage, and then we can attack and use discharge for the damage. So that's how the build works. And then I also want to explain how the weapon swap works. So for the weapon swap, we have the exact same weapons and shield on both slots. We make sure that the gems in this weapon and shield are the exact same on weapon swap too. So if we have flame dash, temporal chains, and inspiration, we want the same on our other weapon, and same with the shield. Immortal Core, cast when damage taken, purifying flame will be on the same shield, so that we don't have to deal with any like shenanigans. For example, if we ran an aura here And if we swapped and the aura wasn't there, that means we had to equip the aura again, which is a lot of pain. And what this build focuses on is getting as many power charges as possible. We want max power charges. At the moment I'm at 11, but every power charge you get an additional endurance charge and frenzy charge, and this is the bulk of our damage. And you can go all the way high to 13 charges, which will get you over 20 million damage per discharge, which is insane. I'll obviously talk about this later on this video of how we get power charges, but this is just how the build works. Alright, for our tree to be the end game tree, the POB will be linked in the description. There is 2 different trees I've added, one with mage blood and one without mage blood, so make sure you check that. But for the general thing is, we want to path down here. Instead of these being increased life, you want to put a chance to avoid bleeding. You want it 100%, as is vital. Obviously with the mage blood you wouldn't need it, as you're going to get immunity to corrupted blood, bleeding on your flask. You want to grab these 2 nodes for more strength and life. We want to grab this jewel socket, and then we want to keep going up the tree. For this bit, it's very important that we get high Templar Dominus. The devotions, obviously I'll talk about this later on, but we want to make sure we get high Templar Dominus Militant Faith for the inner conviction. Again, we go down here, we want to grab these jewel socket. And this one's also very important for our flask uptime, as we want this one here. Enemies you kill that are affected by elemental ailments grant 100% increased flask charges. This is really good, and there's a massive difference between not using this and using it, so I highly recommend using this. We then want to go up to this tree up here, keep going along, grab the jewel socket, and we'll come down to get the mana reservation, and also increase damage for each of the aura or herald affecting you. We continue going on, we grab this node and put Tattoo of the Storm, so another power charge. We go over here and then we get our spell suppression. We'll get our crit multi and crit chance and the other jewel socket. This is our first cluster jewel socket setup, which I'll talk about later on. We'll go up here, grab our first power charge, obviously the extra jewel socket. We'll keep going up the tree, grab this whole crit node with crit damage and crit chance, extra life and spell suppression. We'll continue on to see the second cluster jewel socket, and then for the last bit of our build, you want to grab the second power charge. We'll get another jewel socket and then life and some more damage. Also, you're talking about the tattoos. There is the tattoo of Tassilio Makanga, 8% increased cooldown recovery rate. This is huge quality of life. It does take extra passive points, but these are the areas where you want it for your quality of life. For Ascendancy, we want to get Masterful Form first, and then we want to go up on the tree to get the Bane of Legends, then to Headsman, and then to Brutal Favor as our last node for the Ascendancy. The most important one really is Masterful Form, as that's important to get our charges up and running, so always get that one first. Alright guys, sources of power charges. Firstly, we have our Badge of the Brotherhood. What this does is that our maximum frenzy charges are equal to our maximum power charges. So if we have 8 power charges, it will mean we have 8 frenzy charges. Pair that with the Masterful Form node and our Slayer 2, we also have your maximum endurance charges is equal to your maximum frenzy charges. So this gives us a massive link, as our maximum power charges will equal the frenzy charges, which in return will also equal the endurance charges. And now I want to talk about how we get our power charges on the tree. We first get +1 from our Void Battery. We get +2 from the Malachai's Loop, our shield. We get +1 from our Anoint. I also want to be, you guys must be careful with the anointment, as there are 2 different anoints. One is overcharged, the one we want, and one is overcharged with a D. We get +2 power charges from our tree, which is on the right side of our tree. It is Infused and Disciple of the Forbidden. We get +1 on our helmet. I'd say a rare is pretty good. You get a +1. We also get +1 from a tattoo. the Honored Tattoo of the Storm, which gives us +1 to maximum power charges. And if you have the money for it, a +1 ring will give you +1, and pair that with either another +1 maximum power ring or Reflection of Calandra to get another additional power charge, which will give 2+ power charges on the rings. The gear without the rings has additional +8 power charges, and with the rings is +10. For our leveling, there's a very easy guide out there by Taito Killer. If you want to read it, I'll link it down below. For maxroll.gg, we want to level with Splitting Steel, which at level 2 we can grab Splitting Steel and Chance to Bleed, which we will then use until we reach level 12, which we then move to Spectral Helix. And we will use that till we reach level 28, which we will then finish the leveling with Bone Shatter. At level 70, and after the 3rd lab, we can then change to the Ralakesh Discharge from the Bone Shatter. For our Bandit Choice, we want to kill all bandits. The extra 2 passive points is worth a lot. Alira would have given us the most buffs, but we get a lot of crit multi from other places like our jewels. For our Pantheon, we want to make sure we have Solo the Brine King. We need this so we can avoid being frozen, as the 100% chance to avoid being frozen is extremely good for our build. We also want to get Solo Grekan, as the reduced effect of shock on us is really important for our build. The Cannot Be Blinded and Maimed is also very good and helpful. For our gear, the gear we use is we want 2 Void Batteries, 2 Malachi Loops, so that we can fill both slots. We want to use Ralakesh Impatience Boots. This is the most important part of our build. We want to use a Replica Restless Ward for the extra movement speed and life regeneration. We need the Badge of Brotherhood. This is extremely important as well. And for our rings, we just want stats and life. Stats and life. And if you get crit multi, that's extremely good. Or elemental damage with attack skills. For our helmet, we want a helmet with +1 to maximum power charge. I use Heat Shiver, even though it's more expensive, it does help me get a bit more damage, and the mana regeneration is also pretty nice. Any rare helmet can work. So for example, a rare helmet with a mana reservation would be very good for the build. For the gloves, I use Surge Binders with pretty much perfect. Rare gloves would work, especially with the implicit. You get a bit of elemental damage leech, and with the elemental damage leech you can also get damage per power charge, which is also helpful, and 40% increased damage when an enemy is chilled. This is also very good as we do chill our enemies. And for our belt slot, if you don't have a Mage Blood, it's fine. We would just need a belt with cooldown, recovery, and any other stats that you are lacking, but the images will be shown on the screen. For our skill gems, for our wand, we want to have Flame Dash, Temporal Chains, and Inspiration support. For our shield, we want to have Immortal Call, Cast when damage taken, and Purifying Flames. These should be on both your weapons and your weapon slots, as they'll avoid any conflict in your gem setups. For our helmet, we want to have Temporal Rift, Red Banner, Elemental Weakness, and Enlighten. For our gloves, we want Zealotry, Enlighten, Wrath, and Grace. For our boots, the boots doesn't really matter as much. We just need a red gem that is level 21 with high strength that we cannot use, and anything else in that boots doesn't really matter as we won't be able to use it. For our main gem link setup, we have Discharge, supported by Trinity, Elemental Penetration support, Power Charge and Critical support, Empower. But if you have really high critical chance, then I'd say put critical damage support instead if you don't have a Mage Blood. Inspiration. For our auras, the reason why we have Grace as well, even though we can't use it, is that we can swap between Wrath and Grace. For example, when we're mapping, we can use Grace, have a higher EHP when we're mapping, as we have enough damage to one-shot all the packs. But when we get to higher bosses, we can then swap to Wrath to do 21% more lightning damage for an additional damage buff. Alright, for our jewels, the Balance of Terror with the explicit of 20% increased cooldown recovery rate if you've cast temporal change in the past 10 seconds. So this just makes us temporal chains all the time so that we get 20% increased cooldown recovery. We want Militant Faith. It will be a high Templar Dominus. For the explicits, reduced mana cost is good, and you could also get elemental resistances on the Timeless Jewel, as well as reduced effect of curses is also a very good one. We need this Timeless Jewel so that we can get Inner Conviction, which means that we get 3% more spell damage per power charge. The Watcher's Eye. A very good Watcher's Eye would be something like critical strikes penetrate 10% of elemental resistances while affected by a zealotry. This is the most important one, as we can do more damage with this. And optional ones can be the increased critical strike chance while affected by Wrath, which is really insane if you get 2 of them. And this jewel is pretty pricey, but the only important one that we really need is Zealotry. And for our normal jewels, we want to use pretty much crit multi, and crit multi. So it could be anything from global crit multi to crit multi with any type of elemental damage or with elemental damage. I like pairing it with reduced mana cost of skills, as the discharge does cost quite a lot if you are not using inspiration. And this is just our flat jewels that we need. For our large cluster, I put Sadist, Snowstorm, Widespread Destruction. With Sadist, you are bound to do 40% more damage as we chill and shock enemies. With Snowstorm, we get 8% of extra lightning damage, that's extra cold damage against chilled enemies, and 8% is quite a lot. Our lightning damage is about 370,000 to 1 million lightning damage, so that in 8% is quite a lot. And our other large cluster jewel setup is, again, Disorienting Display, Prismatic Heart, and Sadist, which means that, again, we get 40% more damage from Sadist. We get Prismatic Heart, and Disorienting Display allows us to blind enemies. And again, we have the triple crit multi setup on our jewels. For our flasks, I would highly recommend that we use either a Bismuth flask, as getting resistances is quite tough to do in this build. I'd use a Jade flask or another Granite flask and a Diamond flask. But with the unique flask, you can pair it with a lot of flasks. You can also use Rock Gut flask for more movement speed. You could also use the Vessel of Vinctar, which shocks nearby enemies, making them take 10% increased damage. For bosses, obviously, you can use the Bottled Faith, which I highly recommend using, as if you want to one-shot bosses much easier. The map mods to avoid is that we want to avoid any Reflect maps. Reflect Elemental will kill us. We avoid cooldown recovery maps, as they'll make our discharge skill gem take much longer to get its uptime. We also want to avoid any regenerate, as we have massive mana issues with this build, as mana is quite annoying to get, and we don't use a mana flask. Best tattoos for this build. First, the most important tattoo is the chance to bleed. We want those on our strength nodes at the start. For example, here, these slots over here is very good for chance to bleed. The second most important one that we use is the avoid being stunned. We want to max this out at 100% as well, avoid being stunned, as this also stops us from moving and also bricks our... The next one is reduced effect of shock. You want reduced effect of shock on you, as when you weapon swap you get shock. So when we get more reduced effect of shock, we'll bring the 3% or 1% or whatever it is down to 0. The quality of life tattoo is the Cassilio Makanga, which increased cooldown recovery rate. This is so we can activate our skill quicker. The main places people put these is this one, this one, or we could put them down here as well. Lastly guys, I want to thank you guys for watching this build. Obviously this is the first time I made a build video, so if there's any criticisms, I would like to take that into account. They can help me make videos in the future. This video has taken a lot longer to do. We have about 2 weeks left of the league, which I apologize about. As yeah, I haven't really made videos like this, and it has exposed me to how build videos are made, and it's actually been quite a lot of fun making this video. And with the transitions and stuff, maybe I've taken a bit too much time, but I'd appreciate anyone you know, commenting down below, liking the video, etc. And hopefully I make more build videos. This isn't really my build video, it's just more spreading the awareness. But if I do make a build video, I'll probably do it like this, and like a I tried making it into like a Isoro style, as Isoro is like a channel I used to watch back in the day. And yeah, thank you guys for watching.